Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar on cultural competence for service providers. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time from your very busy schedules to attend this webinar today. My name is Fatih Krakis and I'm the trainer and training and PD coordinator at All Graduates Interpreting and Translating. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start our webinar today. I'd just like to remind you all that the webinar is being recorded and you will all be emailed with a link to the video tomorrow. So all that have registered today, even if you aren't able to attend the webinar live, you will be sent a link to the recording tomorrow. Having said that, this webinar will also be published on our YouTube channel in the upcoming days as well. Those of you that are attending live and have registered will be getting a certificate of attendance as well, and these will be issued to those that have registered for the live event, and you'll be getting these within the next day or so. The webinar is an interactive webinar, so if you have any comments or questions, please type it into the chat function of the GoToWebinar app or the browser that you're using. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter today. Today's presentation will be delivered by Marta Menendez, who is a cultural competence educator as well as a certified Spanish interpreter and translator. She has a master's in social policy as well as an undergrad in translating and interpreting, and has also completed training in training and assessment as well as leadership and management. And she is currently completing her studies doing a master's of translating and interpreting as well. And as you all know, we all live in one of the most multicultural societies in the world, and cross-cultural communication work context is an everyday experience for most of us, and thus it's very, very important for us as well as all the service providers out there to understand cultural competence concepts and acquire the knowledge and skills needed to improve communication with people from diverse backgrounds. And now I would like to hand it over to our presenter, Marta Menendez. Thank you very much, Marta.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, well, cultural competence is part of our job. Although some people think that is an add-on with everything that we need to do, now we need to concentrate on becoming culturally competent. Well, I would say this is not an add-on. This is our job. This is what we have to do if we want to provide culturally appropriate services. So, okay, let's start. What is cultural competence? Today we're going to talk about, we're going to learn something. We're going to learn to apply the concept of cultural competence to the work context, outline the knowledge, skills, and attributes of a culturally competent professional, and communicate effectively with culturally diverse people. Some of the information that I'm going to talk about today, I'm sure that some of you would already know at least some of it, but I tried to do this thinking that a lot of people would not have any idea of what cultural competence is. So bear with me. First of all, I would like you to think about a time when you had to interact with someone from a different cultural background that was different to your cultural background, when things didn't go well. Think about that. Think about that situation and think about what worked or what didn't work. What values and beliefs did you bring to the interaction? Did you learn anything from this interaction? If you have, if you want to make any comment, just like Fatih said, just write it on the chat section, the chat tab, and we'll discuss that later. Okay, so we're going to go step by step. Okay, so what is cultural competence? Cultural awareness. It's part of cultural competence. This is what we used to talk about back in probably the 80s, the 70s, the 80s. We needed to be culturally aware. And we used to talk about tolerance in those days. It was about tolerating differences, diversity, people not speaking other languages, or people not speaking English properly, not understanding people when they speak other languages, on the train, at work. Cultural competence is a bit more than that. Think about it. It could be the situation where we know that smoking is not good for us. I'm aware that smoking is not good for me. Is that enough? Do I do anything about it? Do I want to do anything about it? So we need to add equity. So cultural competence is cultural awareness plus equity. So let's look at what equity is. Equity means recognizing that not everyone shares the same level of resources to improve their life. So it's important to respond to people with different needs in different ways, because equal service does not always result in equal outcomes. Imagine someone who is illiterate in their own language, in the first language. Of course, understanding concepts in English might be difficult, even more difficult for someone that is literate in the first language. There are words that do not translate into another language sometimes. For example, the word depression. If we don't have the word in our language, we wouldn't be able to understand the concept of depression. So people might turn up at the doctor, at the hospital, because of they have headaches, they have stomach problems, they can rest easily, they can sleep, but they never associate it with a mental problem. They understand the physical, they won't understand the mental issues. So some people from diverse backgrounds will trust herbs, roots, more than a clinical treatment. Those are differences that we need to be aware of. And I talk a lot about health because this is my background. This is where I spend most of my life, my working life. Equity means that we adapt our service so our clients, our patients, our consumers have equal outcome. Any questions, Farid, so far?
So far, I don't have anything, Marta. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. So let's look at culture now. Culture is much broader than ethnicity, nationality, language, and is made up of many elements, including our history, religion, values, beliefs, social organization. We learned our culture. And how do we do that? Who are the main people in our lives that pass the culture on to us? So our parents, our grandparents, they are excellent in transferring culture. Think about your grandparents and the way they spoke to you, the way they taught you things, you know, the cooking, the ironing, the anything. Your parents, the media, technology, our teachers, you know, schooling, great teachers, and they pass their culture on to us. But one thing that we need to be aware of is that culture is constantly changing, same as language. It's constantly changing. So it's impossible for a migrant that is living in a different environment that their culture will remain static, stagnant. Will change, culture will change. And it's an integral part of everyone's life. So in this diversity framework, we have us, the self, at the center. So this circle is us in the most basic mode. Then we have the first circle, and this is what most of these elements we get them from birth. So ethnicity, our abilities or disabilities, our genetics, our gender, our orientation can change, the age, and spirituality. Then we have the second circle, and those are elements that can have an impact on us as human beings, have an impact on our culture. So whether we have been victims of violence or abuse, discrimination, racism, our education, the income, our housing, whether we live in a mansion or in a very small house, our place of residence, our health, beliefs, values, whether we've been through a refugee experience, our migration experience, acculturation, at what stage of the acculturation process are we at the moment? Have we been through any acculturation process? Our relationships, family relationships. And then the third one is about the work environment. And that can also have an impact on our professional competence, cultural competence. So our roles, our functions, our seniority, whether we are in a very specific geographical location that makes us feel better or worse, our training qualifications, our affiliations, professional affiliations, all of that can have an impact on our culture and on the way we see life, on the way we experience life. Now, competence is a broad concept. It's a demonstrated ability to use knowledge, skills, and understanding to perform effectively and confidently. So that could be anything. Could be being competent at operating a machine or at providing a service. According to Cross et al., cultural competence, and this is one of the definitions most cited. Cultural competence is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system, an agency, or among professionals and enable that system, agency, or those professionals to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. Fitzgerald 2000 said that the ability, cultural competence is the ability to identify and challenge our own cultural assumptions. And this is why I asked you initially to do a self-evaluation, to self-evaluate one of your encounters with someone from diverse background. Because in order to become culturally competent, we need to go within. We need to identify which assumptions do we have, which are our beliefs, which are our values, which are our biases and the stereotypes that we have. And we all do. We all do have stereotypes and biases. The key is to challenge those. Not to stay with that, those assumptions that we have about people, about communities, about cultures. Challenge those. Think about them and challenge them. So developing empathy and connected knowledge, the ability to see the world through another's eyes, or at the very least, to recognize that others might view the world through different cultural lenses. Our culture has an impact on everything we do. As individuals, the organizations as well. If we don't have policies that prevent from people being discriminated against, for policies that encourage people to use interpreters and translations, for example, we're going to feel that we are not supported at work. It's important that we do have those policies at work. Depending on what is your role, just review those policies. See what they say and what is important in those policies, whether they are okay or whether they need to be changed. Because as we changed, as society changed, those policies need to be changed as well. So let's read this again. Cultural competence is the ability to identify and challenge one's own cultural assumptions, one's values and beliefs, developing empathy and connected knowledge, the ability to see the world through another's eyes, or at the very least, to recognize that others might view the world through different cultural lenses. And we all do have those cultural lenses. So cultural competence is much more than awareness of cultures, and it focuses on the capacity of the system to improve services by integrating culture into the delivery of services. And there are 4 components there: accountability, action, skills development, and reciprocity. So accountability is about those policies that I was talking about. We are accountable. Depending on where we work, I'm sure that there will be a policy that says that you should use interpreters, that you should translate the material. And we are accountable to that. And we are accountable to the people that we serve. And we are accountable to making a good job. The other point is action. We need to take action. In order to become culturally competent, being aware is not enough. As I said, I know that smoking is not good for me, but unless I do something, the problem will not be fixed. I need to do something. I need to become culturally competent, use interpreters, use translators, learn from my patients, clients, consumers. And that's the reciprocity element. They learn from us. We teach them something, but we need to learn something from them as well. Every encounter is an opportunity to learn and become more culturally competent. We talk about a continuum of change. And I'm going to ask you to think about where do you sit in this continuum of change. So we have the cultural destructiveness, cultural incapacity, cultural blindness, cultural competence, and cultural proficiency. Okay, let's go to the next slide and look at what each one of them mean. So we have cultural destructiveness, and that's what used to happen when we had forced assimilation, when we had the assimilation policy back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Subjugation, the rights and privileges are only for the dominant groups. Then we can move to cultural incapacity. That's where we have racism, the stereotypes are maintained, we have unfair hiring practices. Remember that, I don't know, probably 40, 30 years ago, in order for you to become a police officer, you had to have a certain height. That, of course, was quite discriminating, because a lot of people, because they didn't get to the height, could not be police officers. Then they changed that. Cultural blindness, so differences are ignored. Nobody cares about these differences. So we treat everyone the same. If we treat everyone the same, the outcome will not be what is expected. The focus should be on the outcome. The outcome should be the same. And in order for that to happen, we need to adapt our service. If we don't provide translated material when it's needed, if we don't provide an interpreter when it's needed, if we don't become culturally competent, we don't do anything, we don't take action, and we just sit with being aware, then we could be sitting in the cultural blindness section. So we move to the next one, is the cultural pre-competence. Explore cultural issues. We are committed. We assess needs of the organization and the individuals. Then we go to cultural competence. And this is when we recognize individual and cultural differences. And we seek advice from diverse groups and hire culturally unbiased staff. If you are in a position to recruit staff, do you have a criteria in your selection criteria? Do you have one that focuses on diversity? That used to be, I think it is still compulsory in New South Wales. I'm not sure what happens in other states. But you had to have a component in the selection criteria of any job about being aware, being culturally competent, having some knowledge of diversity in the area, for example, in the area that you're going to be working in. And the last one is cultural proficiency. So these people will implement changes to improve service based on upon cultural needs. So think about this graph and think about where you sit on this one. Developing cultural competency is a process. It's a process of continuous improvement, not a one-off event. You can do training, and that's going to help, but it's not enough. It's a lifelong journey. This is something that we learn every day with every patient, with every client, with every consumer. Our clients are the best source of information. One thing that I like to say is that in using interpreters, we use interpreters because our clients can't speak English. And we use interpreters for their own benefit, but we use interpreters as well for our own benefit. We need the interpreter as much as them, or even more, because they have a language problem, but we also have a language problem, and we might have a legal problem if we don't. It's important that we understand that. There have been adverse events in the health area and many other issues happening in the legal environment or at the community, in the community as well, community services, where services were in trouble for not using interpreters. And they had to go to court and they had to pay huge amounts when it's so easy to get an interpreter, especially these days with technology being so available. It's a no-brainer, really. Okay, why is cultural competence important? Because the demographics are changing all the time. If you look at the streets, you just need to look at your area, and you see that demographics are changing all the time. But if you work in an organization, for example, you need to know who are in your area. Check ABS statistics. Find out who are the groups that need more language services. Find out the groups that are growing in your area. And if there are groups in your area that are not coming to your services, why not? Is it an access issue? Is it a language issue? Why are they not? If you look at the health service, the legal service, community services, why aren't they accessing your services? I don't think it's because they don't have any health problems, or because they don't have any legal problems, or because they don't need services. Important because increasing workforce diversity. We have, where I used to work, we had all the communities, all the languages. I used to work very closely with interpreter services as well. So it's changing all the time. And we need to learn from our colleagues. Make an effort. Don't assume that you know. One thing that I like to say as well is that we can have community profiles about any community, and they are good and increases our cultural competence. But when we are dealing with individuals, don't take for granted that you know what that person needs because you attended a language specific, for example, seminar. They are good, they are important. It increases our competence, cultural competence. But when we're dealing with individuals, treat that person as an individual because you don't know, we don't know at what stage in the acculturation process they're in. We don't know unless we ask. They are the best source of information. Check with that person what their needs are. Don't assume. It's important because there are disparities in accesses to services because of many different reasons, all those language or cultural barriers that we discussed before. Unequal educational outcomes, and it's not their fault that they probably haven't finished primary school or high school. Remember that, for example, people from Syria, they used to be really, they are really highly educated people, but they've been through war, and those kids could not attend school. And it's been a long war, so many years of not attending school. Same with, for example, the Afghani community, where women were not allowed to go to school. So it's important that we understand that, yes, there might be problems. There might be educational issues, there might be language issues, but don't assume that those issues are, you know, that they are guilty of it, that is their fault. We don't know unless we ask. And there might be different expectations from service providers and our clients. It's important because there could be cultural influences on accessing services. As I said before, everything we do is impacted, is affected by our culture. So there could be cultural influences on accessing services. It's important because there are policy responsibilities. Depending on where you work, there could be an interpreter policy and there could be a bullying and harassment policy. And if we do something wrong, we could be blamed for it. And we need to comply with those policies. And I added here the New South Wales policies because this is the ones that I know, but I'm sure that you would have similar policies in your states. So multicultural policies, the Principles of Multiculturalism Act, and the Anti-Discrimination Act. And the costs of cultural incompetence are huge. Okay, any questions, Hari?
Nothing at the moment, Marta. Maybe they're all leaving it till the end. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. So cross-cultural communication skills. And this is based on Think to Me. I like those because it talks about the basics of cross-cultural communication skills. Mindful listening. I'm sure you heard about this. Don't just listen. Pay attention. Think about not just what the words that are being said. Think about the words that are not being said. Things that you know that it could be happening in this situation, and the person is not saying it for whatever reason. It could be community pressure, it could be family pressure, it could be anything. But just pay attention to things that are being said and the ones that are not being said. And the body language. Mindful reframing or clarifying, asking them, for example, when you finish your interaction and you gave instructions and you gave a treatment and you see the person saying yes, 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 yes to everything, don't stay with that. Don't think that they understood. Make sure that they did, even while using an interpreter. Make sure that they tell you what they understood that you just said. Reframing. Building trust, very important, especially if you are a project worker. You go to a community organization, for example, because you want to work with this community, and you expect that this community worker will have all the time in the world for you because you are, you are in a position of power maybe, and you have the funds and you want to do this project with this community. Well, sometimes these communities are funded to run a program. And I'm talking about this because I've seen it so many times. They would probably love to work with you, but they're funded to do something else. They need to comply with this funding agreement that they have, and they probably don't have time to give you much. So don't assume that because you go to this organization with your brilliant ideas and the funding, that they will be willing to work with you. That's when you start building trust, trying to find a way to run your project, but it has to be in their own terms. One other thing that I would like to say here is about, because I heard this so many times before as well. It's a very popular phrase here in New South Wales. I'm not sure in other states, is the hard to reach communities. When we talk about communities, and if we know how to work with these communities, we know the basics of cultural competence and cross-cultural communication, those communities are not hard to reach at all. They might not be ready to give you time now, but if you build trust, they will collaborate with you. It's a long process. It's a step-by-step process. And we need to adapt communication styles. So what is a culturally competent professional? A culturally competent professional is aware of the impact of her or his own values on others whose values might be different. Challenges behavior that is culturally insensitive, racist, or discriminatory. And here I would suggest that if we are not part of the solution, we might be part of the problem. If we don't challenge culturally insensitive behavior, we might be part of the problem. We can't just allow that to happen. I know that it's challenging, and especially when it comes from someone in a position of power, it's quite difficult to say something in that situation, but it needs to stop. And the best time to say something to stop it is when it happens. And a culturally competent professional seeks information that will assist in service adaptation to the diverse needs of diverse clients. A culturally competent professional is aware of the impact of her or his own values on others, whose values might be different. Okay. A culturally competent professional uses certified interpreters. Again, the non-English speaker might need an interpreter for linguistic reasons, but you need interpreters for linguistic and legal reasons. Think about that. And we need to learn to work effectively with interpreters. If you don't know how to use interpreters, I suggest that you need to do some training, because some people expect that interpreters will be walking dictionaries, and that's not the case. So in order to have a really good interaction with a non-English speaker through an interpreter, you need to know how to best use the interpreter. Okay, if there are no questions, we can go into some case studies.
Yes, please. Thank you, Marta.
Okay, and I'd like to, there will be some questions at the end of the each case study. So if you can write some comments, that would be good about those questions. So a female migrant approaches the reception counter at your service. She shows the receptionist a piece of paper in which is written in English, "I need an interpreter." The receptionist tells the client in English, "We do not have any interpreters here. Bring a friend or someone that can help you." The receptionist then comments to her colleague standing next to her, "People who come to Australia should learn to speak English fluently before trying to use our services." So what assumptions are the receptionist making about the client? And what would you do if you heard that interaction? What would you do? No comments?
Just waiting. There's someone just before you read that case study. I had a comment and a question came through.
Yep.
Maybe not directly relating to this particular case study, though.
Yep, go ahead.
So I had a doctor's appointment where I felt I was embarrassing the client. I always dress professionally when I attend to on-site job assignments. I tried very hard to interpret in a way that it would make the called feel at ease. What do you do? This is from an interpreter, I believe.
The question is, what would I do as an interpreter?
Oh, well, what can you do? Yeah. So I'll read that again for you. I had a doctor's appointment where I felt I was embarrassing the client. So I always dress professionally when I attend on-site job assignments. I tried very hard to interpret in a way that it would make the cold or the culturally and linguistically diverse client feel at ease. And the question then follows, what do you do?
Yeah, I guess it's important to build, I mean, it's difficult because you have to be totally impartial, okay? But at the same time, we need to be professional and make sure that both parties are at ease, that the communication happens fluently and without any hiccups. Sometimes it becomes difficult when we are dealing with certain issues like where emotions are involved. For example, mental health or domestic violence or sexual assault situations. That can make our role becoming more sympathetic to the patient, or the client or consumer. But I guess we need to do our best to encourage both parties to communicate with ease, because it's going to make our life easier too. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that one was in regards to an interpreter dressing professionally and then kind of making the client feel embarrassed because maybe the client wasn't able to dress as professionally, and hence then tried very hard to interpret in a way that made the non-English speaker feel at ease. Now, thank you very much for that, Marta. I think that definitely touches on the point of impartiality. And no matter how emotional we might get as an interpreter, it's quite important to keep that impartiality. I've got some comments and questions coming on this particular case study. I've got a comment, that's an example of an insensitive person and assuming that the client is lazy to learn English. In the real world, I would not do anything, to be honest, but if I'm in a brave day, I would ask the receptionist to be more empathetic. I've got another one here that says the receptionist assumes that the client has a friend or a relative who speaks English. Also, she is not aware that in Australia we have TIS and many interpreters who can be found via the NATI directory and provide telephone interpreting on the spot, is another comment. I have another comment. First, the receptionist needs some training about dealing with the multicultural society. Second, she is embarrassing herself and the client. And thirdly, client would be lost what to do and who to approach. The client wouldn't know.
Well, sometimes clients don't know that they have the right to have an interpreter.
That's right. We were talking about this just before the webinar. You know, we service providers know that they have access to interpreters, but sometimes the non-English speaking person has no idea that they even have the right to an interpreter, so they might not even request one. And I guess it might be even up to the service provider to assess that and then offer one.
Yeah, exactly. And we also discussed before the webinar started that there is a continuous, especially in big organizations, turnover of personnel, and sometimes the training doesn't catch up with them. It's the training, they don't attend the training as soon as, on orientation day, for example. So they don't know that there is an interpreter policy and that they have to use interpreters. So it's an issue, it's an ongoing issue for big organizations. And because, for example, in the organizations that I used to work, we used to have orientation for new staff and how to use interpreters and how to work with multicultural communities or diverse communities was included in that orientation. So everyone would have at least basic knowledge of how to access our services, and the fact that there is policy that they need to be aware of. But then that was removed from orientation. So we are constantly dealing with this issue of having to educate staff and having difficulties in doing so.
That's right, Marta. I've got a few more comments here. The receptionist is not a professional service provider at all, is a comment. I've got a question here. Who is going to pay for the interpreter, the service provider or the client?
Well, it depends on, I guess, where this person is. Health services, they don't have to pay, the client doesn't have to pay. Legal services, some legal services the client doesn't have to pay. I don't know, Fadi, if you want to add something about that.
Yeah, I think it's about the language policies of that particular institution and the language provisions. But if they are government institutions, in most cases, they would have some funding for that. But I mean, generally speaking, in my experience, if it's an institutional requirement, usually the institution does pay for that, and they would have some funding usually. But so if I have seen it on rare occasions that if a client is, it's mostly I've seen it in legal settings. If they want to approach a lawyer for whatever purpose, it could be, let's say, for example, a divorce, and they require the services of a private lawyer, then they might need to pay for that particular interpreter. But usually in cases of community services, when we look at community services in general, it is the institution that does end up paying for the interpreter, which usually they would have provisions for in most states, in my knowledge.
Yeah.
I hope that
And
answers that question.
you do have in any service, I'm not talking about just health service, in many services, new people that don't know that there is policy. So
Yeah.
even if we can educate them, if we see something like this happening, we can educate them in telling them, yes, there is policy, and this is where you go to for an interpreter.
Definitely, and like we said, community services in general, whether it be health, legal, social welfare, they do have language policies and language provisions, language service provisions. A few more comments here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
In my experience, some organizations do not have proper training for staff about how to use interpreters. At the same time, the non-English speaker also doesn't always know what to expect from interpreters. Again, we were talking about this just before the webinar, and I was actually speaking to some other key stakeholders in the industry just yesterday. That the clients, the non-English speaking client, one of the most important components, the user of the services sometimes doesn't know the difference between a good interpreter or a bad interpreter, or what to expect from an interpreter and what not to expect from an interpreter. So I think some education is also required to be given to communities in general, who can then pass it on to their non-English speakers who do need the services of an interpreter. I think this is a very, very important issue. But
Yeah.
yes, so some, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, some institutions do have in-house training for how to use interpreters. Some of them employ other agencies to train their staff, I guess. I know you were involved in training training service providers on how to use interpreters for decades.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, and as I said, because of the turnover of personnel, it's a never-ending job. It has to be constantly provided, but there are some problems. I conducted a small research while I was working for health, a small research with doctors, and about their knowledge of using interpreters and what would be the best option for them, because as we know, doctors work long hours, and the only time they have for training is probably in relation to clinical training. So getting a doctor to attend how to use interpreter training was barely impossible. So the recommendation was for universities that train doctors to include something. It doesn't have to be a full training on how to use interpreters, but it could be even a role play or a case study where they have to work with someone from a diverse background, and some activity in their training that raises the issue to raise awareness and make them understand how important it is to use interpreters and to use them well. Chipping
Especially
away.
these days we have exactly chipping away. I guess compared to 10, 20, 30 years ago, we are doing much better, but we could definitely there's always room for improvement. I mean, we've just
Yeah.
seen with the pandemic, with some of the translations that have been put out there. Even just a couple of days ago, I was just reading the news again, and some council or some government used Google Translate again to disseminate information. Yes, so here we are trying to get to the bottom of all these things, but then when you have at government level people using Google Translate to actually deliver services, it just yes, we are definitely chipping away at quite a big mountain of issues, but I'm sure we will all get there eventually, as long as we are willing to put the hard work into achieving cultural competency and then further cultural proficiency, like you were saying, as not just individually but also as a society, I think.
It's not just the individual, because the individual, if there are policies in your organization, it's going to make your life very difficult if you want to implement those ideas or improve your service. We need to have those policies. It's important that those policies are there to support services, the organization, and the people that work in that organization. Okay,
That's right.
One.
Marta, just one more question that's just come through.
Yep.
Often the client is unaware that there are cultural differences between their culture and the new culture into which they immigrated to. Should they give, for example, should they give a gift to an officer who was exceptionally nice to them? How will the officer act if such a situation occurred? They may both be very embarrassed.
Oh, cultural interactions are great. Yeah, it could be. It could. But the problem. Okay, we can make mistakes. Okay, we learn from interactions, cultural interactions. We can make mistakes because we are infallible. We are not infallible. We are not perfect. And we can make mistakes, and it's okay to make a mistake, because that's when we learn. But the problem is that sometimes people don't learn. We need to, okay, embrace that mistake, embrace that embarrassment, embrace that problem or that conflict, and learn from it, so we avoid being in the same situation again.
That's right. I guess once a professional client experiences something like that, do they accept it next time? Or when that person from a culturally diverse background, when they go to a doctor again or a service provider again, and maybe the first time they did it, they saw that the service provider was embarrassed so much, maybe they don't do it again, or maybe it's a smaller present. I don't know. But like you said, it's all about learning, and service providers usually deal with a plethora of different cultures, and you almost have to keep notes of who does what and when they do what, and like quite a similar thing happened when I was interpreting in a hospital, and it was quite a young doctor who was very willing, and he was very very happy to be there, and it was a Turkish woman with a head covering, so she was a practicing Muslim. And when the doctor went out to give her a handshake, the patient held the hand back, and
Oh, yes.
yeah, and the doctor just felt so bad, and his face just dropped, and he felt like he did something wrong, and I had to just after I saw how disappointed and sad he was, I had to quickly make a little bit of a cultural information there and say, look, it's got nothing to do with you. This is a cultural thing. You know, some Turkish women, they don't shake hands with men, and that's got nothing to do with you. Okay, so it's a cultural thing. And from that point on, and I explained that to the lady as well, obviously, what I just said. And from that point on, the young doctor was, you know, quite happy again, and he managed to bring his spirits back up again. And after realizing that it wasn't him, you know, it was just a cultural thing.
Yes.
So these things, yes, and I'm sure that next time that doctor maybe greets the patient with a big smile and a big hello, but doesn't put his hand out, and it's not awkward for everyone involved.
Well, that's something that I learned when I first came to Australia, because coming from Argentina, where I come from, a Spanish background, we are good kissers, you know. Just one kiss on the cheek is not like other communities, 2 or 3, just the one. But we hug a lot, and I had to change that when I came to Australia.
Yeah, same.
Because it's not, you know, it's not common here that a woman would hug and kiss a person that you just met. So yeah, that was a culture shock for me.
Definitely. I've got another comment here. There will always be cultural shocks as long as there are human interactions. The participants should be polite and honest with each other and act in good faith whenever such circumstances occur. I think that nails it on the head.
Yeah.
Very good comment there. Definitely.
Okay, let's move to
All
the
right.
next one.
Thank you very much, Marta. We'll continue.
No worries. Okay, so your agency has recently recruited new employees from diverse backgrounds, and they are attending their first team meeting. One of them is wearing a burqa. A group of colleagues are clearly uncomfortable, and during the break, they gather together in a corner of the room, whispering and looking at the woman with the burqa. How would you feel if you were this woman? And what policy is the group violating?
They'll come through. Just give us a few seconds.
It could be a burqa or it could be a hijab.
Could be a hijab, yeah. I've got a comment. I would feel discriminated. Another comment is solidarity. You can't judge based on how they dress.
Yes, definitely.
I would feel out of place and misplaced and not part of a group. It's another comment.
Mm-hmm. Of course. But what is the policy that they would be violating?
The company should have given enough training for staff regarding different cultural costumes and being inclusive is another comment.
Yes, unfortunately, there aren't many training programs that focuses on that area. It would be good if I guess having a culturally competent organization, not individuals, organization is a top-down approach, because the organization will, the workers, the staff, the employees will follow the guidance of the people above them, their managers, their directors. And if you have someone in power, like a manager, a big manager, general manager, a director, doing this, what is left for you? It needs to come from the top. And there could be a bottom-up movement or approach, but it could be really difficult if you don't have a board of directors, for example, that are aware, that are competent, that are culturally competent enough to understand that they need to have policies and they need to be accountable, that they and their staff need to be accountable to those policies.
Got some comments coming in, Marta.
Yep.
I would feel horrible and isolated. It's difficult to be left alone and seeing people talking and whispering about you. That's racism. Another one is, I think this is the one in regards to the policy that the group is violating, is workplace harassment.
Yep.
Another participant has said professional approach is lacking. Feeling uneasy and somehow unsafe would be another way that they would feel. And another comment is, if the organization doesn't train you, you should do a little bit of research yourself so you do have some understanding of culture.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. Because as we discussed before, cultural competence requires action. And in doing some research, you are taking action, even if your organization is not supporting you.
They're taking action today, aren't they? By just being here.
Yes, exactly. Okay, any more comments?
No, I think we can continue. Thank you very much for all those that have commented and asked questions.
Okay, an employee from a diverse background has traveled to her home country, and on her return to the office, she was asked to do a presentation at the team meeting about her traveling experiences and her culture. Why would manager make that request? What would the benefits for other colleagues attending this session? And could there be any negative consequences?
So you were just talking about management before, and here is a management perhaps trying to introduce cultural awareness into the workplace.
This actually happened to me. I used to manage a group of bilingual workers. One of the workers traveled to Mecca, and on her return, I wanted her to provide some information about her experience, because I never heard about someone that had done that, and I wanted to know about her experience. And even though I was working in a multicultural environment, I had some resistance from people from her, I think it was from her own background, but from a different religious background.
Like a different sect of the same religion, or?
No. So Mecca, she was Muslim. The lady that went to Mecca was Muslim, and this other lady was Christian from the same country.
Yep.
So I had a strong resistance from that person. So this is from my own experience.
It's very interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Same, and also like Arabic is one of those languages.
My comment was, if we cannot feel safe in this environment where I was in a multicultural unit. If we cannot be safe in this environment, what can we expect anywhere else?
That's right.
And
like you said,
in other countries, they don't talk about cultural competence. They talk about cultural safety. People need to feel safe in being who they are.
Got some comments coming in.
Yep.
One participant is saying that's a very good request and it will educate the colleagues. A conflict of interest might occur as a negative effect. The management is trying to encourage staff to share their cultural background as a way to introduce the idea of cultural diversity to staff. I guess that answers the first question and the second question.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on the possible negative consequences, right? I mean, you're talking about cultural safety there.
Yeah. It's important that we, when in the old days we used to talk about cultural awareness and tolerance, but we don't want to be tolerated. We tolerate things that we don't like, things that we can't support, and we don't support. We want to be accepted and respected
And equal.
and equal. That's what people expect from us, that we treat them with respect and that we accept the differences.
Some more comments coming in. It can be negative if it happens only to her and not to any other officer who went to their country of origin. And why not ask any officer who goes overseas how she was feeling culturally in the country where they went? So yeah, I guess if it's not a thing that happens regularly, it's not a regular event where everyone who goes overseas does something like this, and this particular person is almost picked on or has thought that well, we need to learn more about your culture, so you give us a presentation. Another comment is it's a clever request from management, and another comment is she has a high level job here. Sorry, the management is giving the chance to the employee to introduce her colorful culture to her colleagues. The colleagues would be more aware of the culture, competency, value, respect, and understand others. My niece arrived here 4 years ago. She had a high-level job and she gives speeches about her culture. There, that's what the high-level job related to.
Yeah. One thing that I like to say is that sometimes interpreters are asked to become cultural advisors or cultural experts. I would suggest that to be careful about that, because even though that I worked in the multicultural environment for 30 years, and that I could say I had lots of interactions with people from I don't know how many countries, but I wouldn't say that I'm a cultural expert, not at all, or an advisor. I can give you I can pass on my knowledge and my experience, and whatever I know, I can pass it on to you. However, we need to treat people as individuals. We can't ask, for example, an interpreter to become an advisor on culture, because that interpreter would have her cultural lens. And that interpreter might know a bit about her culture, but she might not know enough about a particular patient or a particular client. That culture is an individual thing.
Yeah, it's very easy to stereotype, isn't it?
It's very easy. That's why I think community profiles and sessions about specific cultures are great if we take them as a general information. We don't use it to stereotype a person.
I think in my experience, both as an interpreter and as an interpreter trainer, the trick is to give information but not give advice. Just informing about that particular information about the culture, but not necessarily telling them what to do. Like in that particular example I gave before about the doctor trying to shake the hand of the Muslim woman, it's
Exactly.
I gave information about the culture, but then I didn't say, well, don't try to shake her hand next time. I didn't say that. I just gave the information. This is what happens in this culture, and then it's up to that individual to take what they take from that,
Exactly.
and then do what they wish with it. And yeah, just got to be. It's a very tricky situation. It's a fine line, Marta, of being giving cultural information and being a cultural advisor is a very fine line, because as an interpreter, clarity of role boundaries, we're not supposed to give any advice or guidance as an
No,
interpreter.
no. So
So
it's a risk. It's a risk for the interpreter to be asked, and it would be a risk to provide that advice for the interpreter, or for the service provider to request that from the interpreter.
That's right. And like you said, it's you got to take it on an individual case basis, because it might be something for one person, and then even though the next person that you see may look similar, they might have completely different set of beliefs and experiences, and it would be completely different outcome. So
Yes.
that's right. I think
The other thing,
there's a fine line there.
the other point that I would like to make is that, for example, from the Spanish background, or the Arabic background, or Chinese Mandarin background, you have people sharing the language, but they might not share the culture.
That's
So
right.
assuming that someone from Spain would know how the Nicaraguan community, someone from Nicaragua, will react to something, will behave, how they will be behaving, it's not appropriate. It's unreal. No, you can't expect that an interpreter from Spanish background, being born in Spain, would know how the people from Nicaragua will behave.
That's right. I mean, Arabic and Spanish spoken in many, many different countries.
Exactly.
French as well, spoken in many different countries.
Exactly.
But even within the same country, there are so many different cultures. Just assuming that a person who speaks one language, you can't just generalize the culture of the entire country onto the one person.
Yeah, exactly.
There are even, like, you look at Australia, there are different cultures between New South Wales and Victoria and Northern Territory. Just even in a country like Australia, where you do have so many different levels of multiculturalism, but also it is just the one country that speaks the one language as well, isn't it? It's a massive continent, but
Yeah.
even here, there's massive cultural differences. So, like you said, it's very, very easy to stereotype, and it's something that I think everyone should refrain from. You're right.
I guess the key, the golden rule is never assume. Never assume that you know. Never assume that you have all the information. Never assume that because you attended one training session, you just suddenly became culturally competent. It's a long journey.
And like you said, it's a never-ending journey, because
It's a
culture itself is always changing.
And in a country like Australia, which is, it's so multicultural, no matter where you go, it's so multicultural. And there we have new communities coming in all the time. Once you learn to work with this community, you want to run a project, the same project, with another community, and you need to start from scratch again. You
That's
need
right.
to start from zero, building trust, knowing the people, knowing their boundaries, knowing their relationship, how they relate to you. It's an ongoing, lifelong journey.
Just a couple more comments, Marta. it might be better to tell the employee before their visit to their trip to make sure that they are happy to do it upon their return, as opposed to just, I guess, putting it on them like that. Another comment is sometimes clients do expect the interpreter to provide certain advice on, for example, how to proceed with their certain application. It can be a delicate task to inform the client that we are not in the position to provide advice. Instead, legal financial professionals may be consulted. I think this is again coming from an interpreter.
Yes, yes. Oh, well, we are in that situation all the time. Clients expecting us to do more than we are supposed to do, or even from service providers to ask interpreters to do things that, fill out the form, for example. And that could be put interpreters in a bit of a problem, because what if even if you fill out the form with information provided by the client, what if something goes wrong and then the client says, but the interpreter filled the form wrong?
Yeah. I didn't tell him that.
I didn't tell him that. So there are things that we need to be aware of as interpreters, that what we need to do, what we have to do, what is our role and what is not our role. And this is why a service provider need to know what interpreters can and cannot do. Why is important to be trained about the role of the interpreter and how to work with interpreters.
Thank you. I think that concludes our comments for that one.
Okay, so I think we are finishing with this presentation. And as a closing activity, I'd like to ask you to think about what would be your next step in your journeys towards becoming culturally competent. What do you think would be your next step? What can you do? You've done this training. What can you do now? Are you going to travel as soon as the borders are open to a country that you've never been to and learn from those communities, from those people? One thing that I normally do when I travel is to move away from cities. Go to the country areas, go and see how people live, because cities are cities. Yes, they're beautiful. Yes, there are big buildings. Yeah, there are museums. But I want to see how people live in those countries, the real people.
That's so. Just as you were saying that, a participant has said, the next step I will take in my journey towards the cultural competence is share this information with my colleagues, and then in capitals with an exclamation mark at the end, the word travel.
Yes, that's one way of doing it. The other way is, as we discussed before, learn from each interaction. Pay attention to each interaction. And if you make a mistake, well, so be it. Learn from it, so you don't make the same mistake again. Researching about the communities that you have in your area. Check what communities are you serving in your area, and which communities are in your area that are not accessing your service, and why. Cross-check with the number of communities that you have, or the biggest community, for example, in your area may have what good level of English. So do you need to work with that community, or you move on to the next community that have language problems? even though the first one is the biggest community in your area. I think it's important to know which communities you have in your area, but it's also important to know at what level of acculturation they're in and what is their language level.
I believe some councils have this kind of metrics available on their websites, you know, the population breakdown of the culturally and linguistically diverse residents. I have seen on some websites, I believe they all do, just a breakdown of languages spoken and the cultural backgrounds each council has. And I've also encountered on the SBS Cultural Atlas website as well, which provides some nice general information about the different cultures in the world, and I think it's a good starting point as well, especially these days when we unfortunately can't travel as freely as we used to. It could be a good starting point, just to, you know, have a look at what kind of communities are within your council or local government area, and then you know, start doing a little bit of online research. Like I said, SBS Cultural Atlas, I think, provides some good general cultural information about the communities that do reside in Australia.
Yeah, I think I have, you had some comments from, I can't find the information at the moment. I had it here closed with me, but I can't find it now, about some questions that people asked prior to the
oh yes, that's right. Look, we can send that out. We can send that out. We usually do an FAQ to our participants. So all the questions that come in, anything we haven't been able to answer, we do get back to all the participants with an FAQ format. Before just coming to that, sorry, I do have a comment. To mix with, again, you know, what kind of action will you take? To mix with the local, I guess it's communities, if it is safe to do so. On the other hand, research and maybe read books about the places that you might go to. Another comment is, you are right, it's an ongoing journey with multicultural awareness for both newly arrived communities and existing communities. Another comment is, the approach towards other cultures is a very sensitive issue. Therefore, we need to be aware of diversity, understand and embrace differences. Yep.
Yes, I'm just going through a question that was sent to you prior to the webinar, and
That's right.
how can we ensure our organization's culturally safe and welcoming for people from diverse communities? Again, we talk about cultural safety. And how do we have discussions about white privilege with our staff or teams? And that's a difficult one. That's a difficult one because it's hard to explain privilege to people who always enjoy them. They don't. Yeah, it's you know, they say that privileges are blind to people that always have them. They don't even understand that they are privileged. So it's difficult it's a difficult topic to talk about. And it's difficult because people get defensive. But one thing that we need to keep in mind is that it's not their fault. Just as much as it's not migrants' fault to, you know, having to move to Australia. People migrate for various reasons. One thing I would say is that we can't change people that are not motivated to change. So I would refrain from trying to change those views, because it could be quite a conflict. You can get into a huge conflict. So I guess test the waters and see if you can help them see what their privileges are, why they are privileged. And there are a lot of video clips in YouTube about different exercises that were, that are available for you to discuss if you have an opportunity, at a meeting or whatever. And I suggest that you can look at the clips from Dr. Robin DiAngelo. She's quite good at talking about privileges. And see if you can get some ideas from that. Okay.
Thank you very much, Marta.
That's it from me. Thank you. And I'll leave that for Fadi to discuss the next steps.
Marta, thank you so much. A big round of applause to you. I thoroughly enjoyed that presentation, and hopefully I am too on the way towards reaching cultural proficiency. I was probably... That's right. I kind of looked at where I was on that line, and I thought I was much more ahead, but after your presentation, I might actually be a little bit more behind than what I thought I was, and I also do have quite a long way to travel. So thank you very much for your presentation indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all of you for participating today with all your comments and questions, as well as being here with the live webinar as well. You will all get a link to the recording tomorrow, and you will also all get your certificates of attendance as well. Now, at All Graduates, we also provide in addition to this cultural competence webinar, we also try to run cultural awareness sessions on different cultural groups in Australia, especially within regards to communication strategies relating to interpreting and translation for institutions which want to disseminate information to these groups. So far, we have run a couple of sessions, one on Chin and Burmese culture and language, and one on Kurdish culture and language as well. And this is done in a panel discussion where we have Associate Professor Uldis Ozolins, as well as on the panel we have interpreters and translators of these languages and cultures, and they discuss the differences of dialects, the differences of written language versus spoken language, and different cultures, of course, within these particular cultures. Now, these are already available for free on YouTube. So it's on our YouTube channel. If you have a look on your screen down the bottom, you can have a look at Conversations Interpreting and Translating YouTube channel. So just search for us on YouTube and you can access these webinars that have already been delivered. So one on Chin and Burmese culture and language, and the other on Kurdish culture and language. And there is also one coming up as well on Chinese culture and language. So if you'd like to attend the live session for that, that one is coming up, and I'm sure that we will be sending out invitations to you. But if you wanted to take note, our cultural awareness session on Chinese language and culture will be on the 14th of December, again at 2 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, so 2 o'clock Melbourne time. We will be running this session, and if you register for it, you can of course ask your questions to the panel, but also even if you can't make it there on the day, it will also be made available on YouTube for future access too. But if you did want to attend live, it will be again free of charge for you. So if this is a community that you deal with generally, whether it be for translations or for interpreting, we will have a panel of different panel members from different cultural backgrounds, whether it be from mainland China or Hong Kong or Taiwan or Singapore, and they'll be talking about the differences between spoken written language, Mandarin versus Cantonese versus Hokkien and so on. So it could be quite an interesting, it will be quite an interesting panel discussion. So please put that in your diaries and register. And if you do attend live, you always have the opportunity to ask questions as well. We are also on social media. If you want to connect with us online, you can see all our social media pages there as well, if you'd like to get information on further training opportunities with conversations, interpreting and translating. Again, thank you so much for your attendance today. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in our next presentation. And I'd like to take this opportunity also to thank Marta Menendez again for her extremely insightful presentation today. Thank you so much, Marta.
Thank you, and thank you all the participants for the comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule today, and we hope to see you next time. All the best.